Welcome to Conversation with a Shipmate. I'm Petty Officer Dominique Pinheiro. Joining me today is Commander John Beery, the Senior Medical Advisor at Navy Wounded Warriors Safe Harbor. Sir, thank you for taking the time to talk to us today.
Absolutely, glad to be here.
Traumatic brain injury is one of the most common issues affecting today's service member. I want to start by talking about the different severity of TBI.
Well, we've got essentially three broad categories of traumatic brain injury. Mild traumatic brain injury, also referred to as concussion. There's moderate and severe traumatic brain injury. Differences would be in the mild traumatic brain injury or concussion, very common, can be associated with sports, minor accidents, blast, being in the proximity, being hit in the head or having something hit you in the head. If you happen to not wear your seatbelt in an MRAP and you hit the ceiling of the MRAP, it's likely you're going to get a traumatic brain injury or, in this case, a concussion. Certainly in high-speed motor vehicle accidents and some blast exposures, we're going to get into the moderate and severe brain injury. And those tend to be differentiated by how long you're either unconscious, how long your memory lapses are, how long, and then the severity of unconsciousness. In severe brain injury, you could be unconscious for, this is where we think of as coma. We've all heard of people who've been in a coma after an accident. That would be a severe brain injury. There may be structural damage to the brain. And then another category of severe brain injury would be a penetrating trauma. So if you happen to be shot in the head or have shrapnel wound to the head, or if the accident or injury was so severe that the integrity of your skull was actually breached, would be a penetrating trauma to the brain.
All right, so I leave here today, I drive home, get in a car accident. What kind of signs should I look for?
Well, immediately at the time of the accident, if you're well enough to be screened and go home, and then you go into sick call or to medical appointment later in the week, the things that they're going to screen you for, and these are the DoD definition items, as well as things that in the civilian sector doctors would be asking you, is we'd be looking for a brain injury event. So in this case, the auto accident, the whiplash, or bumping your head on the window, the steering wheel, or when you hit and you went backwards and hit your head into the seat. That would be the head injury event. Did you have a loss of consciousness? In this case, we'll say no. Did you have an alteration of consciousness, which is when you see stars or you feel lightheaded, disoriented. In high school sports or in most sports, this would be called getting your bell rung. That's the kind of the term that everybody would use. That's the common term. And then the other thing would be, do you have any loss of memory associated with the event, especially from the event onward for a few seconds to a few minutes to, up to a day, not remembering. Those would be symptoms that we would be looking for to call this a concussion or a mild traumatic brain injury. Obviously, if you were knocked out and you stayed knocked out for a long period of time, then we'd be looking at the moderate and severe brain injury, but you wouldn't have gone home, you wouldn't be following up in the clinic, you would have gone directly to the emergency room and had a much more extensive full body workup for that severe of an accident. But fender bender, where you bumped your head, those would be the things we'd be looking for. Head injury event, mild alteration of consciousness, a loss of consciousness, or some post-traumatic amnesia.
What are some long-term signs for the more severe injuries?
The typical course of a concussion is we have a little bit of headache, we feel like we're in a fog. Literally, you just feel disoriented. Kind of like sometimes when you're in an airplane and you land and your head feels congested, or when you have a cold and you just don't feel yourself, you just can't concentrate. It's difficult to, watch TV. It's difficult to be in bright lights. It's loud noises are really bothersome to you. These are kind of the normal things that you would find after a concussion. Sometimes you don't sleep well, and those symptoms tend to go away by about 7 to 8 days. Most people. most people after a concussion, whether you get in a car accident, whether you're hit on the football field, whether you fall down on the ski slope, or whether you've, in my experience, even being blown up in an MRAP, after about 7 to 8 days, the majority of people, their symptoms clear, their headaches resolved, they're sleeping through the night again, the fogginess has cleared, they can think, they can communicate, the bright light doesn't bother them so much, and they can tolerate an exercise, a burst of exercise without developing a headache or without having a reoccurrence of symptoms. So that would be the normal progression of a concussion, would be that 7, 8 days. You're feeling better, don't require any medication. And then if some people take longer, if they've had a recent head injury, if they had a concussion at the beginning of the football season or at the beginning of the deployment because they weren't quite sure how they were supposed to approach a hill in an MRAP, and they went straight up over the top and they hit an IED. And then at the end of the deployment, they happened to be riding with another new guy who did the same maneuver. Got hit by 2 IEDs in the same deployment. So sometimes the second injury takes longer to recover from. Not a whole lot, but it might take a little bit longer. Certain symptoms may linger longer. And then when we get out to 6 or 8 weeks of persistent symptoms, that's when we really have to be concerned that we need to do more investigation and looking more at the underlying medical problems that the person could have if they had an underlying mental health condition, to include something like ADHD. We have a lot of children and young adults who have ADHD. They take medication so that they can focus and concentrate. Well, a head injury sometimes will make those symptoms a little bit worse, exacerbate those symptoms. And so if the symptoms persist, then we have to look and say, well, are we seeing a manifestation of this underlying problem, or is this a new problem because of the blast injury or the auto accident or the sports injury? So really you'd be looking at how long did the symptoms last. By instruction, if you're in theater, you would get that first day after the blast exposure or the concussive event, you'd get 24 hours, light duty, follow up the next day, and then we kind of reassess and see where you're at. And then based on your symptoms and your ability to tolerate an exercise challenge, will determine when you can go back to duty. And then that would be then a self-report after that as to whether their symptoms have truly cleared or whether they are having persistent symptoms.
So what kind of support would I get if I had a moderate or severe or even a mild TBI?
Let's stick with in the vein of the mild traumatic brain injury.
Okay.
We would give you light duty. If you had photophobia or your light sensitivity, we would write you on your light duty chit that you're allowed to wear sunglasses, a broad brimmed hat, and we would ask your command to support that. We might limit your time that you are at work that day. We might give you some earplugs, because if you're sensitive to the noise, even your alarm clock going off at the very low setting could really be uncomfortable for you. And we'd give you the opportunity to get better. We'd limit your activity and let your brain rest and recover. In a severe or moderate brain injury, same principles apply. There would probably be a period of inpatient hospitalization, some convalescent leave that you would have after that, and then when you were ready to return to duty, we would be addressing other deficits. If you had some movement dysfunction because that part of your brain was affected as well, we would do physical therapy, occupational therapy, to relearn some of those skills that maybe were injured, and that you have to do some retraining. It's just like when your computer crashes and you lose a couple programs, you have to reload those programs. Sometimes it used to take quite a while to load software back onto your computer. Not so hard now, but if you go back a few years and you think to that analogy that, okay, yeah, we scrambled our CPU a little bit and we just need to reboot some software and we need to add some programs back to it to get full function back. And if not full function, we're going to maximize function. That was one of the things I had in a conversation last week, is that in the past, we used to think that at about a year after a severe injury was kind of where you maxed out. But now more and more research is showing that with continued therapy, continued cognitive retraining, that we're still seeing benefits years and years and years later. So it's a painting a very positive picture, even for severe injuries, that we're going to return to some sense of normalcy, and if not normal, a new normal, and we're going to provide some adaptive things to help you deal with your slight challenges.
Is there anything else you'd like to say, add?
I'd say that the DoD program is very good. We screen people before we go to theater, which is standard of care in concussion care. Most everybody who has children running around out in the community playing sports, if they do a collision or contact sport, they're being asked to go down and get a pre-concussion screening tool done now, and then if you have a concussion, you get it done afterwards, so you can compare any sort of cognitive deficit. We do that. We use the same techniques that are used in the civilian sector to evaluate concussions, monitor concussion recovery, and then to decide that you can return to play. So, you know, we're following all the state-of-the-art things that are being done in the medical community throughout the world to take care of our wounded, ill, and injured sailors, Marines, Coast Guardmen, soldiers, and airmen across the services, because these are DoD policies. So I'd really like to say that everybody should be pretty happy and excited that they are getting top-notch care. And it's going to be consistent from place to place because of the instructions. If it's inconsistent, it's because somebody didn't know about the instruction. They didn't know where to go to get that medical information. But all of those products are available online, and anybody who takes care of concussion knows where they are.
Doc, thank you very much.
You bet.
Appreciate your
Good
talking
to help.
with us. So, got a quick question.
Yeah.
What